surveys of Muslim communities worldwide, leading to the book, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think, which she co-authored with John Esposito. She was also appointed by President Barack Obama to the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and she directs our research, including so much of the research you're about to see in just a moment. So please join me in welcoming Dalia.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome. How many people here would consider yourself a media creator? Person who creates media. All right, wonderful. How many of you have a social media account? Okay, then all of you are media creators. Every single one of us. If you have a Facebook account, a Twitter account, an Instagram account, you're all making media. So this is a workshop for media professionals, traditional media professionals as we think of them, journalists, editors, but it really can apply to anyone creating media, anyone with any kind of audience who's putting content out there can benefit from this workshop. So why does the media matter? That's what we're going to start with. We're going to then go into replacing fear with facts and talk about who American Muslims are from an evidence-based perspective. And then we're going to end with tips and examples for creatively and confidently covering American Muslims. Why do we care about the media? Why should we want to improve media coverage? Why should we try to teach media creators to cover American Muslims creatively and confidently? Well, here are some statistics that might surprise you or may not. First, roughly half of Americans say they don't know a Muslim, okay? So they've never met a real-life Muslim, and so they're getting most of their information from the media about this community. Now, what does the media look like when it comes to coverage of Muslims? One study out of a company called Media Tenor found that 80% of coverage of Islam and Muslims was negative. And in fact, the year after, it was up to 90% of media coverage in American TV news media was negative. That compares to coverage of North Korea, which is 73% negative. So you have a community of 1.8 billion people, of which most are allies, more negatively portrayed than a country that has openly and unapologetically threatened our country. But it's not just news media on TV. Another study found that over the past 25 years, notice 25 years does predate 9/11, the New York Times, right, the so-called liberal paper, portrayed Islam and Muslims more negatively than cancer and cocaine. So do we need to educate media professionals on covering our community? The answer is absolutely. It is an urgent need. Because how people consume media and the messages they hear directly impact how they vote, directly impact policies. So one study found that reliance on media for information about Muslims, which is most Americans, was associated with Americans' support for public policies targeting Muslims 3 months later. So there's a lasting effect. These policies included military action against Muslim countries, separate and more thorough airport security lines and for Muslim travelers, and even revoking the right to vote for Muslims, for American Muslims. So educating media is a matter of a critical, urgent need. Here's a perfect example of what we mean when we talk about media bias. What is wrong with this headline? Now, here, let me just give you some background. It is about a study that found that the majority of fatalities in America at the hands of extremists are at the hands of white supremacist terrorists. But here is the headline from the Washington Times, right here in DC. Majority of fatal attacks on US soil carried out by white supremacists, not terrorists. Right. So how do we replace fear with facts? Well, first, we educate ourselves and media professionals about who American Muslims actually are. These are some faces of American Muslims who are doing phenomenal things. And I'm just going to jump right into the data, though, because our time is short. First, American Muslims are the youngest faith community by far. In fact, the average age of this community is a full 20 years younger than the average age of the general public or any other faith community. A full quarter of American Muslims are between the age of 18 and 24. Far more likely, far greater portion of young people than any other faith community in America. American Muslims are also the most ethnically diverse faith community in America. So about 25% of American Muslims identify as Black or African American, 24% identify as white, 18% as Asian, and another 18% as Arab, 7% as mixed race, 5% as Hispanic, and then we have every other group that you can imagine, including Native Americans and people who just identify as other. Now, why this is important is because every other major faith group has a majority race, and that majority is white. We are the only faith community where our majority, where we have no majority of one group. But we are predominantly people of color. So that's one thing. The second thing that it's important to note is that only 18% of Muslims are Arab. So the idea that Arab and Muslim are can be interchangeable or to conflate the two groups is not, of course, supported by the evidence. And then finally, this is how America will look in a few decades. So the challenges and opportunities of this kind of diversity within the Muslim community, the kinds of things that we're discovering and solving, can help to inform the whole country in the future. Half of American Muslims were born in the United States, and the other half are naturalized citizens, or not citizens, but 36% are naturalized citizens, 14% are not citizens. So 86% of American Muslims are citizens. Now, what does this tell us? One is that no, not all Muslims are immigrants. Of course, a full half of us were born in America, but that the immigrant story is still part of our narrative. Now, it's important to note, though, and this is, I want to put lots of underlines behind under this. Just because half of us are immigrants doesn't mean that that Islam is a foreign religion. There has never been an America without Muslims. There has never been an America without Muslims. Muslims fought in the Revolutionary War. In fact, the Smithsonian has records of the very first census in the United States, what we're about to have, due in a year. And that very first census records the population of the United States as 5% Muslim. We're only 1% now, so we've actually gone down in population, not up. Now, there's also this myth of the model minority, and many Muslims are wealthy, but we're also the most likely faith community to be poor, to live at or below the poverty line. So while Muslim Americans are disproportionately an engine for economic growth, we create more jobs per capita than almost any other group, we're also the most likely to be struggling economically. And that's something for the community to note as well as the broader public. Our education level is similar to Christians in America. And Muslims are identify as Democrat more often than Republican. And Muslims and Jews are the two most likely faith communities to identify as Democrats. Now, what's important to Muslims in their political priorities? The first and the second are very similar. They're the two most frequent responses when asked, what do you think is the most important issues facing our country today? And those are the kinds of questions you just heard us ask Senator Warren. One is about jobs and the economy, and two is about bigotry and civil rights, racism, and discrimination. Then comes healthcare, education, and poverty, and then national security. Now, the American Muslim community disproportionately feels the negative effect of the current political climate, in case you didn't know that. The first statistic is not from ISPU, it's from the FBI, where in 2016, the FBI recorded more hate crimes targeting Muslims than any time in record, on record, even higher than right after 9/11. And so it's not surprising that as a result of the 2016 elections, Muslims and Jews, especially Muslims, experienced the most fear and anxiety of any faith group. Muslims are also the most likely faith community to report having experienced religious discrimination. And it doesn't just impact adults, though. Muslim children are the most likely to say that they have experienced some level, some frequency of religious-based bullying. 42% of Muslim families with kids in school, K through 12, say that their children have been bullied because of their faith in the last year. Now, that's already alarming, but what I think is even worse and more alarming is that 25% of the time, 1 in 4 of these incidents involve a teacher or an administrator as the bully. The bullying is not just happening from other students, but also from adults. How are Muslims responding to this? They're responding with faith, with civic engagement, and with solidarity with other targeted groups. So first, not surprising, Muslim satisfaction with the direction of the country is declining over time. It was 63% satisfied during the last part of the Obama administration in 2016, and is only 27% satisfied in 2018. But that doesn't mean they're not proud of being Americans. So most Muslims say they are proud to be identified both as a member of their faith and as an American. 86% of Muslims say that they are proud to be identified as a member of their faith community, despite the social cost of being a Muslim today. No less likely than any other group to say that. We also have seen a steady climb in Muslim voter registration, from only 60% registered, and I want to emphasize one thing. This is among eligible voters. So it's not lower because some people aren't citizens. We only ask this question if the person said they were in fact eligible to vote. So in 2016, 60% of Muslims were registered to vote, who could vote, who were eligible, and that has climbed to 75% in 2018. Muslims are also the most likely faith group to say they support the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, African Americans and Muslims are not two mutually exclusive groups, obviously. A quarter of Muslims identify as black. But even among non-black Muslims are also the most likely group to support the Black Lives Matter movement. This is a movement and an issue that is important to Muslims regardless of race. So some myth busting, and I know that the majority of the people in this room are Muslim, But it's even, I would argue, more important to go through this with Muslims than anyone else, because we have found in our research that many Muslims endorse and believe the myths that they've been sold in the media about the community itself. So it's important to have the facts, whatever background you are. The first kind of point that might fly in the face of conventional wisdom. Frequent mosque attendance is linked to greater civic engagement. Now, I remember in 2016 with the Republican primaries, we were hearing about things like closing down mosques because they spread radicalization. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is quite the opposite. Attending a mosque more frequently actually promotes democracy, actually promotes greater civic engagement, actually is linked to being more likely to join a civic organization and volunteer to help society as a whole. We also know that American faith groups, regardless of faith background, share both a strong religious and American identity. Muslims are no different in this regard. Being an American is important to how they think of themselves, and being a Muslim is also important to how they think of themselves. And we wanted to ask an even, a follow-up question on that, or we wanted to dig into this data a little bit more by finding out, does a strong religious identity correlate to a weaker American identity? Are they truly trade-offs? Or do you have to compromise one to make the other one strong? And the answer is absolutely not. What we found is that Muslims with a strong religious identity were even more likely than those with a weak religious identity to identify strongly with America, with being an American. So identifying and saying that being Muslim is important to you is linked to being to an even stronger American identity. They are not trade-offs, they are mutually reinforcing identities. Muslims are also the most likely faith community in America to condemn violence. We asked about violence in two different ways. The first was in regards to targeting civilians by a military. Now, I just want to make it clear that this is the definition of a war crime, according to the Geneva Convention, because this is a deliberate targeting of civilians. And Muslims are by far the most likely faith group to say it's never justified to target and kill civilians by a military. We asked the same question, but we just replaced military with an individual or small group. And here, Muslims are as likely as Jews and non-affiliated Americans, and more likely than some other groups, to say that this is never justified. Muslims are by far at least as likely as anyone else to reject violence. Now, some other points, in addition to just how Muslims think, to kind of drive this point home, though. Most American terrorist fatalities are at the hands of white supremacists. This is now more and more apparent and obvious to people, but it used to be a controversial point. This is a simple fact. The majority of terrorist fatalities in America are at the hands of white supremacists, not people acting in the name of Islam. What's even more interesting, though, is that the same study that found this also found that even law enforcement agencies ranked anti-government extremists as greater threats than Al-Qaeda or like-minded terrorist organizations. Now, let's talk about Muslim women. We found in our research about how Americans view how Americans view Americans who are Muslim. So non-Muslim Americans have a lot of, have different stereotypes when it comes to Muslims, but the most salient, shared by a quarter of Americans, is the idea that most Muslims discriminate against women. So the idea of an especially misogynistic Muslim community is the most popular, most widespread anti-Muslim stereotype that there is. And so I want to address it head on. The most visible and often the target of people's attacks on Islam and Muslims when it comes to women is often the hijab. And anyone who wears hijab, or even if you just know someone who wears hijab, you know that the assumption is often that we are we're dressed this way because someone is forcing us to be. So we actually ask people two questions. One is, do you wear a religious symbol all the time, some of the time, or never, that lets people know your religion? And we asked this of everyone, including Muslims, and about half of Muslim women said that they wear this kind of a symbol all the time. Okay, so about half of Muslim women in America wear hijab. Then we asked people, why do you wear this symbol? Can you please tell me why you wear this symbol? And the majority of Muslim women said, who wear it all the time, said that they wear it for religious reasons, to please God and out of piety. The second, that was 54%. The second most frequent response was, so people know I'm a Muslim, 21%. Modesty came next, it was 12%. How many people said it was because a family member made them? 1%. Now, that is lower than some other faith communities said about their religious symbol, where it wasn't huge, but 7% sometimes would say it was because a family member was requiring it of them. The idea that this is something forced on women by their family is not supported by the evidence. Now, what about domestic violence? Domestic violence is often thought of as something that plagues the American Muslim community or the Muslim community more than others, or that it's a pathology inherent to the Muslim community, rather than simply being a problem that human beings are plagued with in general. So one really powerful thing about our research is we always ask the same exact question of everybody. We don't just ask Muslims a question, we ask all faith communities in America that we can reach the same question, all major faith communities. So we ask Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Protestants, non-affiliated Americans, and the general public, do you know a person in your faith community who was the victim of violence from someone in his or her family? And what did we find? It was exactly the same percentage across the board. This is a human problem. It is no worse, unfortunately no better in the Muslim community. But what is unique among Muslims is that they are more likely than any other faith community to go to a religious leader after it happens. That implies, that suggests that they are, the victim is expecting support from a religious leader. That they don't think that this is condoned by their faith, but rather something that they can get help from a religious leader if they were to go to them. Muslims are as likely as other faith communities, though, to report it to law enforcement. That is equal across the board, but where Muslims are unique is that they are more likely than any other faith group to say that they do go to a religious leader. Now, how do Muslims feel about this idea of misogyny? Well, they're the least likely to endorse misogynistic Muslim stereotype. 10% of women in the Muslim community and 13% of men say that they or endorse the idea that Muslims, most Muslims in the United States discriminate against women, compared to a quarter of the general public. do Muslim women actually say is threatening them, though? And what do they say is a source of happiness and pride? Muslims across the board, whether they're male or female, they're equally likely to say that their faith is a source of happiness. What does plague or what does threaten American Muslim women is not Islam. It is Islamophobia, racism, as well as gender discrimination more broadly. Now, what you see here is a comparison of Muslim women and women in the general public on their experience of religious discrimination, Muslim women far more likely than other women, racial discrimination, 3/4 of Muslim women have experienced some form of racial discrimination in the past year, and then gender discrimination, where the two are equal. Muslim women are not more likely than anyone else to face misogyny. It's a reality of being a woman in America. But they are far more likely to face Islamophobia and racism. So if anybody would like to save Muslim women, they should fight Islamophobia and racism and not save them from Islam. And the truth is that most Americans actually say they want to live in a country where no one is targeted for their religious identity. So working together, we can make this kind of a country possible. Hate hurts everybody. Because when we are afraid, we are more likely to accept prejudice, but also conformity and authoritarianism. Fear kills freedom. So what should we do to help the media professionals in our country do a better job of covering American Muslims? The following are tips and examples for creatively and confidently covering American Muslims. The first is to move beyond the security lens. Americans that are Muslims are often viewed through a security lens, cast as either good Muslims or bad Muslims from purely a security-oriented perspective. So stories about bad Muslims who are violent, or the rare good Muslim who is rooting out extremism in his own community, dominate the American imagination, oftentimes when it comes to American Muslims. Americans that are Muslim are more than this binary, though. They are doctors and cab drivers, they're school teachers and physicists. So expand the voices that inform your reporting. So what stories feature the voices of American Muslims? Check this with the way that coverage is done. So what stories feature the voices of Americans that are Muslim in my media outlet outside national security? Are we including Muslim voices in stories about things that concern all Americans, like education and healthcare and domestic poverty? So 2 good examples. I'm only giving good examples now. So 2 good examples of where this was done is NPR did a story about Muslim kids getting bullied in school. Another great story was about how Muslims contributed to the alleviation of suffering of the people of Flint, Michigan because of the Flint water crisis. Those are great examples of viewing the community as fully human and not just a good or bad Muslim based on security issues. The idea that Islam is foreign is another issue to watch out for. Islam doesn't hate us. Islam is us. There has never been an America without Islam. There has never been an America without Muslims.
Hello. There doesn't appear to be any activity in this meeting. If you would like to stay on the line until others join, please press 1. If not, I'll end the meeting.
AI gone crazy. So from early explorers to enslaved Africans to immigrants from around the world, there's never been an America without Muslims. But despite this, Islam and Muslims are often cast as foreign, as non-American, as other. Black Muslims also make up 25 to 33% of all American Muslims, the largest single race group. So American Muslims are just that. They're American and should be treated like any other American in how we discuss their stories. So some things to check as you're doing your reporting. Am I unintentionally othering Muslims by casting Islam as a non-American religion despite its long history in our country? Oftentimes we hear about this, the new religion of Islam coming to America, which we can even reinforce in the way we talk. So that's why we have to educate ourselves. This is not a new religion. Islam has been here from the very beginning. Am I being representative and including Black Muslim voices in my reporting on Muslim stories? Muslim stories doesn't just mean Arabs and South Asians. We have a much more diverse community than that. So here are some great examples of good reporting. One, there was a good AJ Plus series about being Black and Muslim. And then a second story that The Intercept did about a progressive Muslim candidate who wants to flip a Florida district. And he'll have to beat both parties to do it. Just a story about a local politician that did not cast this guy as foreign but an American politician trying to run for office. The third issue is to ask, what's religion got to do with it? Or what's religion not got to do with it? Islam too often is cast as the one explanation for anything bad Muslims do. No matter what it is, Islam is blamed, while other factors like mental health challenges, poverty, domestic violence go unexplored. So you can always tell, without seeing any pictures, what a perpetrator of a violent act, what color they are, by just hearing about the coverage. Are we talking about their mental health? Are we talking about their childhood and how their mom was mean or they were bullied in school? If so, they're probably white. If not, they're probably a person of color or a Muslim. So Americans that are Muslim are just as complex as anyone else. And their motivation is also complex. So don't assume religion is the dominant driver in their behavior. Would I assume religion was the driving force in the story if the subject were Christian? It's a really good check. How would I cover the story if the subject were Christian? Or of no faith? What other factors might explain the behavior? Could trauma or economic factors be a more powerful variable than culture and religion? So 2 examples of good reporting in this case. There was a story about Muslim mental health called Bigotry Complicates Everything. And it was an interview with a psychologist on how prejudice harms Muslim patients' mental health. A very rare topic to even hear about in mainstream media. Another was called Investigators Said They Killed for ISIS, but were they different from regular mass killers? It was actually an exploration of how similar extremists were regardless of their ideology. Use culturally neutral language, and this is something I think Muslims have to watch as well. We should use Arabic words where appropriate, but Arabic words or culturally specific language is often used to describe behaviors that are not unique to Muslims or Arabs, making the behavior seem pathological to these communities. Pathological means that it is a disease of that community rather than a human problem. So just be factual and avoid loaded Orientalist language. So am I assigning foreign Muslim-sounding words to universal human behavior? Am I calling something an honor crime that was just an act of domestic violence, where I have no actual proof it was done for any reason other than why domestic violence happens everywhere all the time? What would I call this behavior if it involved someone other than a Muslim? So instead of Islamic terror, how about ideologically motivated violence? Instead of Islamic State, how about self-proclaimed or so-called? Instead of jihadists, how about armed militant? How about instead of honor crime, we say domestic violence? And there were two examples where this was done well. One example was about ISIS fighters. Now, here's the headline. U.S. military kills 150 ISIS fighters with airstrikes, showing war against militants is far from over. Basically, all neutral language, simply factually describing what happened rather than inserting culturally loaded language into the article. Another article was actually about a domestic violence shelter that helped Muslim women, sheltering Muslim domestic violence survivors. The language was neutral. It was not culturally specific to Muslims. And then Muslim women. Represent Muslim women accurately. They're often depicted as victims of their religion and culture, or alternatively, my favorite, as victims turned escapees. So we love the story about the escape of this oppressed Muslim woman, as if that's a progressive story, or something that the media thinks is how they make themselves look culturally astute or something. This flies in the face of actual data showing that American Muslim women overwhelmingly see their faith as an asset in their lives, and instead see racism and Islamophobia as their biggest challenges. So simply be accurate and representative. Feature Muslim women's stories that are driven by the priorities and points of view of the vast majority. And if you want to do a story on the tiny minority, at least tell people it's the tiny minority. Is my story about gender in the Muslim community falling into the trope of Muslim women as either victims or victims turned escapees? Have I included the voices of Muslim women in my reporting that represent the vast majority? They're Islam positive, they're educated, and they're more challenged by racism and Islamophobia than Muslim misogyny. And am I framing misogyny in the Muslim community as unique or pathological to that community, or am I accurately framing it as universal to all communities, which is what the evidence shows? And then a story that did this well was one about Amani Katatbe, who was explaining why she created Muslim Women's Day. So for all of this information and much more, we've created a media professionals toolkit on our website. It's at ispu.org/journalists. And you can send it to your media contacts. You can use it yourself. It's a free resource that has all of this information and much more to help media outlets do a better job of covering our community. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can contact us at info@ispu.org. Thank you very much.
Hi. So you've just seen some of our poll data. We're going to skip this activity. We're going to do a quick poll with you guys. We are hoping that you will participate in helping us communicate to our donors why this research matters. This goes a long way. Please, if you will text MJ16 to the phone number 22333, that will allow you access into this quick 3-question poll that we're going to do. So, question 1. Did you find the research that we just presented of high quality? If you strongly agree, please text the number 5. If you disagree, 1. Everything else in the middle. I'll give you a few moments. And see it happening, which is quite a funny thing. All right, we're going to move on to the next question. Did you find the research that we just presented relevant to your work in some way, to the work of others?
Oh, can you hang on? A few of us are trying to figure this out.
Oh, sure.
So the first one was it?
Welcome to Poll Everywhere.
Yeah.
So I'll go back to the screen. So if you text MJ16 to the phone number 22333, it'll let you into the poll.
I'm in.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we can raise hands or something.
Sure. There's not a URL. It's all text-based, yeah. So you can still answer that first question. And in just a moment, I'm going to activate question 2. Can we give you one more second? I want to be sure we have room for a little bit of time for questions for Dalia. Right, question 2. If you found this relevant, same numbers. Strongly agree is a 5. Strongly disagree is 1. No, it's not super intuitive. Thank you, guys. It really does go such a long way, though. When ISBU is funded in large part by individual donors, and we like to tell them that the work we do matters to people like you. And the very last question: if you plan to apply the recommendations in your life or work, or share them in some way, perhaps retweet.
Oh, it says you can't respond to this poll anymore. To clear this answer, text clear or undo. And we've all got that.
We're going to do some troubleshooting for next time. Please don't let this impact your answers on the 5 to 1 scale. I did see several things register, so I do know it works for some, and then I'll do my best to circulate and answer any questions. I do want to note that we do, I think, have a time for a couple of questions, and I think someone can circulate with a mic. Sure. So we have our first question over here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you both so much. I'm a fellow researcher. I do more ethnographic research, but I'm curious about how you design your surveys and how you find people to participate and make sure that it's a diverse group of people.
Thank you. So we use a firm called SSRS that does all of our surveys for us. They're the same firm that does all surveys for the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN. There was one, and several other media outlets. The chief methodologist there heads APOR. APOR is the American survey research sort of organization that kind of is like the guardian council of survey research in America. And he's our chief methodologist. He does almost every poll on American Jews that you'll ever read. He's the guy, and that's how we found him, because polling American Jews has the same kind of challenges as polling American Muslims, since they're a small percentage of the population and they're a religious group rather than a racial group, where the census doesn't ask about religion anymore. So SSRS takes our questions that we design and asks them of a representative sample of Muslims, Jews, and the general public. And then within the general public, we're able to look at Catholics, Protestants, within the Protestant community, people identify as evangelicals and so forth, as well as non-affiliated Americans. So that's how we do our polling. It's not us doing the surveys, but we've gone out and found literally the top firm possible to do the work right.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. I'm pretty sure that our group will like it very much. A couple suggestions. One, a lot of us here in this room deal with media all the time, whether it is a TV or radio station or something. I think it would be good for each of us to actually print out this material and make a folder. So when we are interviewed and talking about one subject, this is something we'll have to leave that back, and that's how you get the word out. So that's number one. Second is, let's organize a National Media Day at the Capitol, where we have a dedicated day when you can come and we can arrange meetings with all of these elected officials of both parties. to share this information so that they have something. When somebody says something, they can use that as a part of that. And third is, you have been doing a good job of organizing events, specifically inviting media to those. Sometimes it's very hard for media people to go from their headquarters to where you're organizing. May not be a bad idea to actually go to them and make a presentation and invite those people and use the relationship that we have done with those things, and then go right there and say, here are some facts. So just something to think about.
Thank you. That echoes a lot. Actually, I do want to note we have this presentation available on isp.org, and also we have a few toolkits we have an American Muslims 101 toolkit. I love that media at the Capitol idea. Let's work on that.
Thank you so much. It was a great presentation, and it's fascinating. My own background is in marketing and communications, and my question is, so when it comes to all this data that we as American Muslims fight back with, the forces that are against us in the media and otherwise, they have a very unique thing that they like to go back to, and it's called taqiyya, right? Like, that's their big thing. So you can, and I've experienced this, you throw all this out there at them, and they respond with, well, lying is part of your religion, right? Like, I mean, we can't believe anything you say. So how do y'all respond to that?
So it's interesting you bring up taqiyya. First, we have to educate people on what taqiyya actually is. And we so let me explain a little bit about ISPU. We do research on American Muslims, but we don't talk about the teachings of Islam. We leave that to Yaqeen Institute, and we work with Yaqeen very closely. So Sheikh Omar, I think, is going to be giving the closing keynote today. So what we've done is we've referenced Yaqeen in our media toolkit to define some of these terms, to actually give accurate definitions of some of these, quote, Islamic terms that are being completely misused, so that media and others understand. And one of them that they deal with in Yaqeen, and we've taken from their work and cited it, is this issue of taqiyya, where we explain, or Yaqeen explains, taqiyya is not a license for Muslims to lie. That is not what it means. The concept of taqiyya is that if your life is actually in danger, or someone else's life is in danger, and you're being asked to recant your religion or else die, like in the Inquisition. This is not a theoretical, right? Muslims have had this situation happen to them, and they still have it happen to them today in places like Burma and China and other places. That you are allowed to say you're no longer Muslim as long as in your heart faith is secure, to save your life or to save someone else's life who has the same thing. That is what we have permission to do. That is taqiyya. But it's not willy-nilly lying about everything. Of course not. Lying is actually, Islam puts such an emphasis on the importance of honesty. And so anyways, the only way to push back is to educate people on what these words are. Because it's so funny. Someone told me this funny story. This Muslim, American who grew up in a practicing Muslim household, and he went to this town hall meeting about a mosque that was being built. And this guy sitting next to him, he looked like a white supremacist, from his tattoos and everything, and he was like, well, it's all about taqiyya. And this Muslim guy had no idea what the word even meant. He had never heard it. And so this guy was educating him about it, telling him about this word about his own religion that he doesn't even know, because it is an obscure concept that most people aren't learning about in Sunday school, because it's not relevant usually to our world. We're not going through an inquisition. But the only reason most Muslim Americans even know what it is because the right wing has taken this concept and misrepresented it.
Hey Dalia, that was awesome, as usual. My question is, if you could add a question to the study that isn't currently represented in the study, like maybe an area of future research that you're really excited about, what would that be? I know I work on a study, and like me and my team are always thinking about, like, our study's really long, but there's also these other things that we wish we could ask about. What are those things for you?
Well, it's a good question, and I'll have to think about that a little bit more. We're always coming up with new questions every year, but I will take this as a plug, an opportunity to plug the fact that we offer space for purchase for people who would like to ask questions, and this is at a. If you were to do your own study, it would be orders of magnitude more expensive than adding a question to our study, because you get all of that, economies of scale. So if you are interested in adding a question or two, let us know, and we'll see how we can work together on that. And we had several groups do that in our last study. I'm always interested in issues of free speech, so that's one area that I'd like to explore more. We actually had some really great questions this year that we had to cut because it was just too long.
I apologize, but we actually have the senator already online waiting for us to start for our 1 o'clock time. So I really want to thank Dalia for a great presentation. And if everybody wants to take a quick 2-minute break, 15-minute break, so that you guys take a coffee or tea and then come straight back, please. Thank you.